The room was filled with the most dangerous men in the city, men who killed without blinking. But everyone was staring at the boy in the corner. He was rocking back and forth, covering his ears, terrified of the noise. The guests, billionaires, politicians, and mobsters sneered at him. They called him broken. They called him a mistake. No one dared to approach him because his father was Dante Moretti, the most ruthless don in the underworld. Everyone was terrified of Dante, so they ignored his son. Everyone, except her. When the waitress stepped forward, the music stopped. The guards drew their guns. But she didn't flinch. She just held out her hand and whispered 4 words that changed the fate of the crime family forever. This is the story of Sophie, the woman who danced with the devil's son. The chandeliers of the Pierre Hotel ballroom didn't just sparkle. They glared. It was the annual Obsidian Charity Gala, a polite term for the night when the city's legitimate elite rubbed elbows with its illicit rulers. For Sophie, it was just another shift. Her feet ached in the cheap black flats she was required to wear, and her uniform, a starched white shirt and black vest, felt like a straitjacket. Sophie balanced a heavy tray of champagne flutes, weaving through the crowd with the practiced invisibility of the working class. She knew the rules: don't make eye contact, don't speak unless spoken to, and never ever spill a drop. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, cigar smoke, and fear. The fear had a source. He stood near the grand staircase, a man who seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. Dante Moretti. He was taller than the other men, broad-shouldered, wearing a tuxedo that cost more than Sophie would earn in 10 years. He had dark hair swept back, and eyes the color of a stormy sea, cold, turbulent, and predatory. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't smiling. He was watching the perimeter, his body coiled like a panther waiting to strike. But Sophie wasn't looking at Dante. She was looking at the boy, sitting alone on a velvet bench 10 feet away from the Don. The boy, no older than 8, was dressed in a miniature version of his father's tuxedo. But the bow tie was crooked, and he was rocking back and forth, a rhythmic, frantic motion. His hands were pressed tight over his ears, his eyes squeezed shut. Sophie paused, clutching her tray. She recognized the signs immediately. Her younger brother, who had passed away 3 years ago, had been on the spectrum. She knew that look. The boy wasn't being difficult. He was drowning. The clinking of crystal, the roar of laughter, the live jazz band. It was all an assault on his senses. What broke Sophie's heart wasn't the boy's distress. It was the reaction of the guests. A woman in a silver-sequined dress walked past the boy, accidentally brushing against his knee. The boy flinched and let out a low moan. The woman recoiled, sneering. "Control your child," she muttered to her husband, loud enough for people to hear. "He's disturbing the atmosphere." "It's the Moretti kid," the husband whispered, pulling her away. "They say he's simple, a defect. Shame for a man like Dante to have a weak heir." Sophie's grip on the tray tightened until her knuckles turned white. She looked toward Dante. The Don was occupied, surrounded by 3 large men associates from the Rossi syndicate who were blocking his view of his son. Dante didn't see the woman sneering. He didn't see his son starting to hyperventilate. The boy let out a sharp, high-pitched cry. It cut through the jazz music. The room went silent. Dante's head snapped toward the sound, but he was boxed in by the Rossi men. A waiter near the boy, a man Sophie knew as Greg, rolled his eyes. "Hey kid, shut it," Greg hissed, leaning down. "You're scaring the rich folks." The boy, Leo, panicked. He scrambled backward on the bench, knocking over a pedestal that held a massive floral arrangement. The vase crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Water and roses spilled everywhere. Leo screamed. It was a sound of pure terror. Greg raised a hand, looking like he was about to grab the boy's arm to haul him away. "Don't touch him!" The voice rang out, clear and sharp. It was Sophie. She didn't think. She didn't calculate the risk. She slammed her tray down on a nearby table, not caring that 2 glasses tipped over and sprinted across the polished floor. Greg froze. "Sophie, get back to work. I'm handling this mess." "You're making it worse," Sophie snapped. She dropped to her knees amidst the broken glass and spilled water. She didn't care that the shards were cutting into her stockings. She didn't reach for Leo. She knew better. Touching him now would be like touching a live wire. Leo was curled into a ball, rocking violently, sobbing into his knees. The entire ballroom was staring. The band had stopped playing. The silence was heavy, judgmental, and cruel. Sophie took a deep breath. She blocked out the eyes of the billionaires. She blocked out the terrifying shadow of Dante Moretti, who had just pushed past the Rossi men and was striding toward them with murder in his eyes. She focused only on Leo. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sophie whispered, tapping her hand on the floor in a steady rhythmic beat. Thump, 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 thump. 1, 2, 3, 4. She repeated her voice, low and melodic. She wasn't trying to hush him. She was giving him an anchor, a pattern. Leo's sobbing hitched. He didn't look up, but his rocking began to synchronize with her tapping. Sophie began to hum. It wasn't a lullaby. It was a simple, repetitive melody she used to hum for her brother. She kept the rhythm steady on the floor. Thump, thump, thump. "Can you hear the floor?" she asked softly, not looking at him, just staring at her hand. "The floor has a heartbeat. Listen." Dante Moretti had reached the circle. He stood 6 feet away, his hand hovering near the inside of his jacket, where a gun undoubtedly rested. His face was a mask of fury, ready to destroy whoever had hurt his son. But he froze. He watched the waitress in the cheap uniform kneeling in the water. He watched her ignoring the blood seeping from her knee where a shard of glass had pierced her skin. Leo slowly lowered his hands from his ears. He looked at Sophie's hand tapping the floor. 1, 2. Leo whispered, his voice trembling. 3, 4, Sophie finished. She looked up at him, smiling gently. She didn't pity him. She looked at him with respect. "Do you like the rhythm, Leo?" Leo nodded slowly. "It's better than the noise, isn't it?" she said. She slowly stood up, keeping her movements fluid. She held out a hand, palm up. Not grabbing him, just offering. The music they were playing was too messy, too loud. "Do you want to make our own rhythm?" The crowd gasped. No one touched the Moretti boy. He was known to bite, to scream, to thrash. Leo looked at her hand. Then he looked at her eyes. He saw safety there. Slowly, tentatively, the boy reached out and placed his small hand in hers. Sophie began to sway, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. "Left, right, left, right." Leo mimicked her. He stepped left. He stepped right. He focused entirely on her voice and her movement, the chaos of the room fading away. For a moment in the middle of the ballroom, the waitress and the Mafia prince were dancing. It wasn't a waltz. It was a survival mechanism. Sophie looked up, and for the first time she locked eyes with Dante Moretti. The air between them crackled. Dante wasn't looking at her, with the lust she usually saw in men's eyes. He was looking at her with a terrifying intensity, as if he were trying to dissect her soul. He looked from her bleeding knee to his calm son, and an emotion flickered across his face that Sophie couldn't place. Shock, gratitude, or something darker. "Get her name," Dante growled to the head of his security. A massive man named Marco. He didn't whisper. "Get her name and bring her to the car. Now!" Sophie's heart stopped. She had calmed the boy, but she had attracted the beast. Sophie was trembling, but she refused to show it. She sat in the back of a black Cadillac Escalade. The leather seats were softer than her bed at home. The windows were tinted so dark that the city lights of New York looked like distant dying stars. On the seat opposite her sat Dante Moretti. The car was moving part of a 3-vehicle convoy, speeding toward the Long Island estates. Sophie still had her waitress uniform on, though someone had given her a first aid kit for her knee. She had bandaged it herself in silence, while 2 armed guards watched. Dante hadn't said a word since she was escorted out of the hotel kitchen before she could even clock out. He just stared at her, swirling a glass of scotch he had poured from a crystal decanter built into the car's console. "You're bleeding on my upholstery," Dante said finally. His voice was deep, a baritone that vibrated in the small space. Sophie looked down. A fresh spot of blood had seeped through the white bandage. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll pay for the cleaning." Dante let out a short, dry laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. "You make $12 an hour, Sophie Vance. You have $22,000 in student debt, and you're 3 months behind on the rent for your apartment in Queens. You can't afford to clean this car." Sophie went cold. "How do you know that I know everything?" Dante said simply. He leaned forward, the shadows playing across the sharp angles of his face. "I don't like surprises. When a stranger touches my son, I find out who they are." "I didn't mean to overstep," Sophie said, her voice steady, despite her fear. "He was in pain. Everyone was just watching him like he was an animal in a zoo. I couldn't stand it." "And what made you think you could fix it?" Dante asked, his eyes narrowing. "The best doctors in Switzerland couldn't get a Leo to stop screaming during an episode. Specialists, psychiatrists, and you—" A waitress stopped him in 10 seconds. "How—" "They try to fix him," Sophie said, a spark of anger rising in her chest. She forgot for a second that she was speaking to a man who had allegedly buried his rivals in concrete. "Leo isn't broken. He's just overloaded. The world is too loud for him. I didn't try to fix him. I just gave him something else to focus on. A pattern. Control." Dante stared at her. The silence stretched for a long, agonizing minute. He took a sip of his scotch, his eyes never leaving hers. "My wife died 4 years ago," Dante said abruptly. Sophie blinked. "I'm sorry." Since then, Leo has not spoken a full sentence to anyone. Not to me, not to his tutors, not to the nannies. Dante set the glass down. "Until tonight, when he counted with you." The car hit a bump, and Sophie winced as pain shot through her knee. "I need a solution," Dante said. "I run an empire, Ms. Vance. I have enemies. The Rossi family, the Albanian syndicates. They smell blood in the water. They see Leo's condition as a weakness they can exploit. They think I am distracted." He leaned closer, the scent of expensive tobacco and sandalwood filling her senses. "And they are right. I am distracted. I cannot protect him and fight a war at the same time. The nannies quit after a week. The bodyguards frighten him." "What are you saying?" Sophie asked, her breath hitching. I'm saying you are hired. Sophie shook her head. I already have a job. I'm a waitress. Not anymore. I had Marco call your manager. You were fired for damaging hotel property, the vase Leo knocked over. You did what? Sophie gasped. That wasn't my fault. I have bills to pay. Exactly, Dante said calmly. Which is why you will accept my offer. You will come to live at the Moretti estate. You will be Leo's companion, not a nanny, a handler. You will keep him calm. You will teach him that rhythm of yours. You will make sure that when I am out dealing with my business, my son is not screaming in terror. I can't just move into a mob boss's house. Sophie snapped, panic rising. I have a life. You have a debt and an empty fridge, Dante corrected. I will pay you $10,000 a month, plus room and board, and I will wipe your student debt within 6 months. Sophie's mouth went dry. $10,000 a month? It was life-changing money. But the cost, and if I say no, she whispered. Dante's expression didn't change, but the air in the car dropped 10 degrees. He reached into his jacket pocket. Sophie flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a folded piece of paper and tossed it onto her lap. Sophie unfolded it. It was a photograph. It was a picture of her apartment building, taken from across the street. Taken tonight. The Rossi syndicate saw what happened at the gala, too. Dante said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. They saw a woman who could control the Moretti heir. They think you are important to me. Which means you are now a target, Sophie. If you go back to your apartment tonight, you won't survive until morning. They will take you to get to me. Sophie stared at the photo, her hands shaking. The reality of the situation crashed down on her. She had stepped into the spotlight, and now she couldn't step out. So, Dante said, leaning back and buttoning his jacket. It's not a job offer, really. It's protective custody, with a salary. The car slowed down. Sophie looked out the window. Huge iron gates were opening, revealing a sprawling mansion that looked more like a fortress. Armed men patrolled the perimeter with German shepherds. Welcome home, Sophie, Dante said. The car stopped. The door opened. Marco, the giant head of security, stood there. Boss, Marco said, his face grim. We have a problem. Security sweep found something in Leo's bedroom. Dante's face transformed. The cool, calculated businessman man vanished. The monster appeared. What? A doll, Marco said. One of those cheap ones. But someone cut the head off and left it on his pillow. There was a note. Dante uncoiled from the seat, storming out of the car. Show me. Sophie scrambled out after him, her knee throbbing. Wait, where is Leo? He's in the safe room, Marco said, looking at Sophie with suspicion. Dante turned back to her, his eyes blazing with a terrifying fire. You start now. Go to him. Keep him calm. If he cries, the men get distracted. And if the men get distracted, we all die. But go, Dante roared. Sophie didn't argue. She limped toward the massive front doors, entering the lion's den, leaving the safety of her old life behind. Forever. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the only thing standing between a frightened little boy and a war that was about to burn the city down. The safe room was a misnomer. It was a vault. Sophie had followed Marco through a maze of corridors, down a hidden elevator behind a bookshelf in the library, and into a subterranean level that felt more like a military bunker than a home. The walls were reinforced concrete, cold and grey, though someone had tried to soften the blow with expensive Persian rugs and leather furniture. Leo was huddled in the corner behind a massive leather sofa. He wasn't screaming anymore. He was silent. A terrifying, absolute silence that was worse than the crying. Sophie's knee was throbbing, the bandage soaked through with fresh blood, but she ignored it. She limped toward the sofa. "Stay back!" A guard barked from the doorway. He had an assault rifle strapped to his chest. "Mr. Moretti said no one touches the boy until he gets here. If I don't touch him, he's going to retreat so far inside his own head, you might never get him back." Sophie shot back, her voice echoing off the steel walls. She turned her back on the guard, a dangerous move in this world, and knelt on the rug. "Leo," she whispered. No response. The boy was staring at the pattern on the rug, his eyes unblinking. He was dissociating. The threat of the doll, the violence of the image had been too much. Sophie lay down on the floor. It was undignified for a grown woman, especially with armed men watching, but she needed to be on his level. She needed to be smaller than him. "This rug is scratchy," she said softly, scratching the fabric with her fingernail. "Scritch. Scritch. It sounds like a dry leaf. Can you hear it?" Leo didn't move. Sophie closed her eyes. She thought of her brother, how he used to shut down when their parents fought. She started to hum again. Not a song, just a low, vibrating resonance deep in her throat. It was a grounding sound. Minutes passed. The guards shifted uncomfortably. Then a small finger poked Sophie's arm. She opened her eyes. Leo was looking at her. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. "The doll," Leo whispered, his voice barely audible. "It had no eyes." "I know," Sophie said, not sugarcoating it. "It was a mean toy, a broken toy. But we are safe here. Look at these walls. Nothing gets through these walls. We are in a castle, underground." "Like Batman?" Leo asked. Sophie smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "Exactly like Batman. And your dad is out there making sure the bad guys go away." "Dad is scary," Leo said. "Dad is scary to them," Sophie corrected. "So he can be safe for you." The heavy steel door hissed open. The change in air pressure popped Sophie's ears. Dante Moretti walked in. He had removed his tuxedo jacket. His white dress shirt was rolled up to the elbows, and there were dark, wet spots on his cuffs that Sophie knew weren't wine. He smelled of copper and ozone, the scent of violence. He stopped when he saw them, the waitress lying on the floor in her stained uniform, and his son sitting cross-legged next to her, tracing the veins on her hand. Dante's chest heaved. He looked exhausted. For a second, the mask of the Don slipped, revealing a terrified father. "Leo," Dante said, his voice rough. Leo looked up. Usually he would flinch, but with Sophie's hand grounding him, he just nodded. "Hi, Dad. We are in the Bat Cave." Dante blinked, stunned. He looked at Sophie. His eyes traveled from her messy hair to her bloody knee. "Marco," Dante said without turning around. "Get the doctor, for her knee, and bring fresh clothes. Something soft, no uniforms." "Yes, boss." Dante walked over and sat on the expensive leather chair, slumping forward, putting his head in his hands. He didn't look like the most powerful crime lord in New York. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. "Is it safe?" Sophie asked quietly, sitting up. Dante looked at her through his fingers. "The house is on lockdown. My men are sweeping the perimeter. The doll was a message from the Rossi family. They wanted to show me they could get into my son's bedroom. How did they get in? Sophie asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Dante's eyes hardened. That is what I'm going to find out. Someone on my staff betrayed me, and when I find them— He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. It wasn't a man, Sophie said suddenly. Dante frowned. What? The person who left the doll? It wasn't a man. Sophie hesitated, realizing she was involving herself in Mafia business, but she couldn't stop. When I went into Leo's room earlier to grab his blanket, I smelled something. It was faint underneath the smell of the cleaning products. What did you smell? Dante demanded, leaning forward. Vanilla and something burnt, like clove cigarettes, Sophie said. It's a very specific perfume. My aunt used to wear a cheap knockoff of it. It's called Midnight Orchid. It lingers. Dante stared at her, his mind racing. He stood up abruptly. Marco. The giant guard reappeared. Who smokes clove cigarettes? Dante barked. Marco hesitated. The new upstairs maid, the one we hired last week. Elena. Dante's face went stone cold. Find her. Now. We can't, boss, Marco said, looking at the floor. She clocked out an hour ago. She's gone. Dante swore a stream of Italian curses that made the air vibrate. He punched the concrete wall, his knuckles cracking against the stone. Leo flinched, curling back into a ball. Sophie moved instantly, placing herself between Dante and his son. She stood up despite the pain in her leg and put a hand on Dante's chest. Stop, she ordered. The room went deathly silent. The guards reached for their guns. No one touched Dante Moretti. No one ordered him to stop. Dante looked down at her hand on his chest. He could snap her neck with one hand, but he felt the heat of her palm through his shirt. He looked into her eyes and saw no fear, only fierce protectiveness. Not for herself, but for his son. You are scaring him, Sophie whispered. Go clean up. Wash the blood off your hands. Change your shirt. Then come back and be his father, not the Don. Dante stared at her for a long, intense moment. His heart was pounding against her hand. He took a deep breath, the red haze of rage slowly fading, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. You have a sharp nose, Sophie, Dante said quietly. He covered her hand with his own for a split second. His skin was rough, calloused. Thank you. He turned and walked out of the vault. Sophie let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Her legs gave way, and she sank back onto the rug. She was trapped in a bunker with a Mafia heir, having just identified a traitor and ordered a killer to calm down. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was a player in the most dangerous game in the city. 3 days had passed. The Moretti estate was no longer a home. It was a fortress under siege. The security had tripled. Men with earpieces stood at every corner. The windows were covered with steel shutters at night. Sophie had been given a guest suite next to Leo's room. It was larger than her entire apartment in Queens, with a bathroom made of marble and gold. But she felt like a bird in a gilded cage. She hadn't been allowed to leave the property. Marco had collected her things from her apartment, bringing them in cardboard boxes that smelled of her old life. She had settled into a routine with Leo. The boy was brilliant, she realized. He wasn't slow, as the tabloids claimed. He was hyper-focused. He loved patterns, numbers, and music. They spent the mornings in the music room. Sophie played the piano badly, picking out simple tunes with one finger. and Leo would correct her, hitting the right keys with perfect pitch. "No, Sophie, it's C-sharp, not C." Leo would say, his brow furrowed. "Show me." She would smile, and he would. Dante watched them. Sophie could feel his eyes on her constantly. He watched from the doorway of the music room. He watched from the balcony as she walked with Leo in the enclosed garden. He watched her on the security monitors in his office. He was trying to figure her out. He couldn't understand why she was there. Everyone in his life wanted something: money, power, protection. But Sophie hadn't asked for a dime. She hadn't asked for jewelry. She just asked for lactose-free milk, for Leo and a specific type of sensory clay. It was Thursday morning, and the tension in the house was palpable. The hunt for Eleanor, the traitorous maid, had gone cold. Dante was like a caged tiger pacing the halls. Breakfast was served in the solarium. The sun streamed through the bulletproof glass, illuminating the feast laid out on the table. Silver platters of fruit eggs, pastries, and Italian cured meats. Dante sat at the head of the table, reading a dossier. He wore a crisp grey suit, his hair perfectly styled, but the dark circles under his eyes betrayed his lack of sleep. Leo sat to his right, wearing headphones to block out the sound of the silverware clinking. Sophie sat opposite Leo. "Eat," Dante said without looking up. "You're too thin." "I'm fine," Sophie said, pouring herself coffee. "Did you sleep?" "I don't sleep when there are loose ends," Dante replied. He looked at her. "We found Elena's apartment. It was empty, but we found a bank transfer from a shell company linked to the Rossi family. $50,000. "That's the price of betraying you?" Sophie asked. "It seems low." "Life is cheap in this city," Dante said darkly. A server, a young man named Paolo, who had replaced the previous staff, brought out a special glass of juice for Leo. It was a thick green smoothie spinach apple, and supplements the doctors insisted on. "Here you go, Master Leo," Paolo said, placing the glass down. His hand was shaking slightly. Sophie noticed it. She noticed everything now. The adrenaline of living here had sharpened her senses. Leo reached for the glass. "Wait," Sophie said. Dante looked up. "What is it?" "Paolo," Sophie said, turning to the young server. "You're new." "Yes, miss. Started yesterday." Paolo was sweating. It was cool in the room. "Why is the smoothie that color?" Sophie asked. "Usually the apple makes it a lighter green. This is dark, almost brown." "I used organic spinach, miss." "It's darker," Paolo stammered. He took a step back. Leo lifted the glass to his lips. "Leo, put it down," Sophie shouted. She didn't wait. She lunged across the table, knocking the glass from Leo's hand. The smoothie splattered all over the white tablecloth and Leo's shirt. Leo screamed, terrified by the sudden movement. Dante was on his feet in a split second, his gun drawn from his holster. He didn't aim at Sophie. He aimed at Paolo. "What is in the glass?" Dante roared. Paolo turned to run, but he didn't get far. Marco, who was standing by the door, tackled him. They crashed into a serving cart, sending dishes flying. Sophie ignored the chaos. She grabbed Leo, pulling him off the chair away from the spilled liquid. The liquid was sizzling slightly where it hit the silver platter. "Acid," Dante whispered, looking at the tablecloth. The fabric was dissolving, turning black and smoking. If Leo had drunk that, his throat, his stomach. The room spun. Sophie felt bile rise in her throat. This wasn't just a threat. This was an assassination attempt. Inside the house, at the breakfast table, Dante vaulted over the table. He grabbed Paolo by the collar, lifting him off the ground as if he weighed nothing. Dante's face was a mask of pure demonic fury. "Who sent you?" Dante snarled, pressing the barrel of his gun into the man's forehead. "Tell me before I blow your brains out onto the patio." "Rossi!" Paolo screamed, weeping. "They have my sister. They said they would kill her if I didn't do it. Please, Don Moretti. Please." Dante threw him to the floor. "Marco, take him to the basement. I want to know everything. Every name, every location, every phone number. Keep him alive until I get there." "Yes, boss." Marco dragged the sobbing man away. Dante stood there, his chest heaving. He looked at the dissolving tablecloth. Then he looked at Leo, who was rocking back and forth in Sophie's arms in the corner of the room. Sophie was whispering to him, covering his ears, shielding his eyes from the violence. Her own hands were shaking uncontrollably, but she held the boy tight. Dante walked over to them. He dropped to his knees. He didn't care about the suit. He reached out and touched Sophie's face. His hand was trembling. "You saved him," Dante said, his voice cracking. "Again." Sophie looked at him. Her eyes were filled with tears, but they were angry tears. "How many?" she hissed. "How many people in this house want him dead? I can't protect him from ghosts, Dante. I can't fight an army." "You won't have to," Dante swore. The look in his eyes changed. It shifted from fear to a cold, hard resolve. "I have been playing defense. I have been trying to be a legitimate businessman for Leo's sake. But they don't want a businessman. They want the monster." He stood up, pulling Sophie up with him. He didn't let go of her arm. "Take Leo to the safe room. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me. Not Marco, not the Pope. Only me." "Where are you going?" Sophie asked, fear gripping her heart. Dante checked the magazine of his gun. He looked at her, and for the first time, he let her see the darkness inside him. It was a terrifying abyss, but somehow Sophie didn't want to look away. "I'm going to end the war," Dante said. "Tonight, the Rossi family dies." He turned and strode out of the room, barking orders into his phone. "Prepare the cars. Get the heavy squad. We are going to Little Italy." Sophie watched him go. She picked up Leo, who was clinging to her like a koala. "Come on, Leo," she whispered, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Back to the Batcave." As she ran toward the library, she realized something that terrified her, more than the acid or the guns. She wasn't just afraid for Dante Moretti. She was afraid of losing him. In just 3 days, the monster had stolen her heart, and now he was walking straight into hell. The silence in the bunker was deafening. 6 hours had passed since Dante left. Sophie had exhausted every game, every song, and every distraction she knew to keep Leo calm. The boy was now asleep on the leather sofa, clutching a throw pillow, his breathing even, but shallow. Sophie paced the length of the room. Her phone had been confiscated by Marco for security reasons, so she had no connection to the outside world. She didn't know if Dante was alive or dead. She didn't know if the police were raiding the house or if the Rossi family had retaliated with a bomb. She found herself staring at the heavy steel door, willing it to open. It wasn't just fear for her own safety anymore. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dante's face, the raw, terrified father who had knelt before her, begging her to protect his son. She saw the man who had touched her cheek with a trembling hand. "Don't die," she whispered to the empty room. "You promised to wipe my debt. You can't die yet." It was a lie. She didn't care about the debt. Suddenly, the keypad on the door beeped. Beep, beep, beep. buzz. Sophie froze. She grabbed a heavy brass lamp from the side table, holding it like a baseball bat. The hydraulic locks hissed, and the heavy door swung open. It wasn't the Rossi hit squad. It was Marco. But he wasn't alone. He was supporting Dante, whose arm was draped over the giant's shoulder. Dante was pale, his skin the color of ash. The left side of his white shirt was soaked in bright arterial crimson. "Help me!" Marco grunted, his voice tight with panic. Sophie dropped the lamp and rushed forward. Together they dragged Dante to the sofa, laying him down gently. Leo stirred but didn't wake up. The soundproofing of the room was that good, and the boy was exhausted from the trauma of the morning. "What happened?" Sophie gasped, her hands hovering over the blood. "Ambush!" Marco spat, tearing open Dante's shirt. "We got the Rossi Don. Put a bullet right between his eyes. But they had a sniper on the roof. Dante took a hit in the shoulder. Through and through, but he's losing a lot of blood." "Where is the doctor?" Sophie demanded. "Call Dr. Aris." "We can't," Dante rasped. His eyes were half open, glazed with pain. "Aris. Compromised. Found a wire transfer. In his accounts. Can't trust anyone." "So what are we going to do?" Sophie yelled, looking at Marco. "He's bleeding out. I have a field medic kit," Marco said, pulling a large orange box from a hidden compartment in the wall. "I know the basics. Pressure. Bandage. But I have hands the size of hams. I can't stitch the artery if it's nicked. I need dexterity." Marco looked at Sophie. Then he looked at her long, slender fingers, the fingers that played the piano, the fingers that tapped rhythms to calm a child. "You have to do it," Marco said. "Me." Sophie recoiled. "I'm a waitress. I serve pasta. I don't perform surgery." "You're the only one here who isn't a traitor or a target," Dante whispered. He reached out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak, slippery with blood. "Sophie, please." Sophie looked at him. She saw the life fading from his eyes. If she said no, he died. If he died, Leo was an orphan in a world of sharks. "Give me the kit," Sophie said, her voice turning steel hard. "Marco, hold the flashlight, and give me your belt. We need a tourniquet." For the next hour, the bunker became an operating theater. Sophie's world narrowed down to the wound. It was ugly. The bullet had torn through the deltoid muscle. But thankfully, it had missed the bone and the major brachial artery. It was a venous bleed, messy but manageable if stitched quickly. She poured antiseptic over the wound. Dante hissed through his teeth, his back arching off the sofa, but he didn't scream. He wouldn't wake Leo. "Thread," Sophie commanded. Her hands, which usually shook when she was nervous, were steady now. It was the rhythm. In-out. Loop, pull, in-out. Loop, pull. She treated it like a pattern, like the tapping on the floor. "Talk to me." Dante gritted out, sweat pouring down his face. "Distract me." "You're arrogant," Sophie said, focusing on a particularly difficult stitch. "You think you can control everything. You treat people like chess pieces." "I have to," Dante gasped. "Or we die." "You don't have to be alone," Sophie murmured. "You have people who care. Leo cares. He asked about you all day." "He scares me," Dante admitted. The confession was shocking. "I look at him, and I don't know how to reach him. I feel like I failed him." "You didn't fail him," Sophie said, tying off the last stitch. She grabbed a clean towel and pressed it against the wound. "You just speak a different language. He speaks in silence. You speak in shouting. You just need a translator." She looked up. Dante was watching her. The pain was still there, but his eyes were clear. "Are you applying for the job?" he whispered. "I think I just did," Sophie replied, wiping blood from her forehead with the back of her wrist. Dante reached up with his good hand. He cupped her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. It was an intimate electric touch that sent a jolt straight to Sophie's core. "You are incredible, Sophie Vance," he murmured. "If I survive this night, I'm going to give you the world." "Just give me a bandage," Sophie said, her voice trembling, "and stay alive." Dante's eyes fluttered shut. "Marco," he whispered. "I'm here, boss." "Nobody comes in." Dante ordered, his voice fading into sleep. "Nobody, except Sophie." He passed out. Sophie sat back on her heels, covered in the blood of the most dangerous man in New York. She looked at her hands. She had just sewn a Mafia don back together. She looked at Leo still sleeping soundly. Then she looked at Dante. She realized with a terrifying jolt that she wasn't just doing this for the money anymore. She was falling in love with the broken family in the bunker. And that was the most dangerous thing she could possibly do. The morning sun didn't reach the bunker, but Marco's radio brought the dawn. "It's done," the voice on the radio crackled. It was Vincent Moretti, Dante's cousin and second in command. "The Rossi territories are secured. The police are calling it a gang war, cleaning up the mess. We are clear." Dante was awake. He was sitting up, pale and shirtless, his shoulder heavily bandaged. He looked like a fallen angel, beautiful and broken. "Good work, Vincent," Dante said into the radio. "Call a meeting. The library, noon. I want all the capos there. We need to show strength." "Are you sure, Dante?" Vincent's voice was smooth, concerned. "You were hit. Maybe you should rest. I can handle the meeting." Dante's eyes narrowed. He looked at Sophie, who was making instant coffee in the corner. "I'll be there, Vincent," Dante said coldly. "Noon." He clicked the radio off. "He wants your job," Sophie said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Vincent has always wanted the chair," Dante said, wincing as he stood up. "But he is family. He wouldn't sell me out to the Rossis. That breaks the omerta." "Someone let the maid in," Sophie pointed out. "Someone let the waiter in. Someone told the sniper where you would be." "I know," Dante said. The darkness returned to his eyes. "And today, I find out who." The library, 12:00 p.m. The library of the Moretti estate was a masterpiece of mahogany and leather, but today it felt like a courtroom. 12 men stood around the long table. The capos, the leaders of the different crews. They were tough men, scarred and weary. Dante sat at the head of the table. He wore a black suit, his arm in a sling, concealed under the jacket. He looked impeccable, despite the fact that he had lost a pint of blood 12 hours ago. Sophie stood in the corner, holding Leo's hand. Dante had insisted they be there. "I want them to see my son," he had said. "I want them to see he is not weak, and I want you to watch them." Vincent Moretti stood at Dante's right hand. He was a handsome man, younger than Dante, with a charming smile and expensive taste. He wore a gold Rolex and a suit that shimmered under the lights. "Gentlemen," Vincent announced, "the Rossi threat is eliminated. Don Moretti has led us to victory." The men murmured approval, but Sophie watched their eyes. Some looked relieved, others looked nervous. Leo was agitated. He hated the smell of the library. It smelled of old paper and cigars. He was tugging on Sophie's hand. "Sophie," Leo whispered. "The clicking." "Shh, Leo." "What clicking?" Sophie whispered back, kneeling down. "The clicking," Leo insisted. He pointed a finger at Vincent. "Click, click, click." Sophie looked at Vincent. He was nervously flicking a gold Zippo lighter in his pocket. Click, click, open shut, open shut. It was a nervous tick. Sophie's mind raced. The smell in Leo's room the day the doll was left. She had told Dante it smelled of vanilla and clove cigarettes. She looked at the ashtray on the table near Vincent. There was a freshly extinguished cigarette. It wasn't a normal Marlboro. It was a dark, thin cigarette. A clove. Vanilla and burnt cloves. Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Vincent's shoes. They were Italian leather, pristine. But on the heel of the right shoe, there was a tiny smudge. A smudge of green. Green smoothie. Paolo, the waiter who tried to poison Leo, had spilled the smoothie everywhere. Vincent must have been in the kitchen or near the staff entrance before the meeting, or maybe he had met with Paolo before the attempt. Sophie looked at Dante. He was mid-speech, talking about loyalty. "Loyalty is the currency of our world," Dante was saying, "and betrayal is a debt that must be paid in blood." Sophie squeezed Leo's hand. She needed to tell Dante, but she couldn't just shout it out. Vincent was armed. His men were in the room. She needed a signal. She remembered the piano. "Leo," she whispered, "do you remember the song we played yesterday, the one about the storm?" Leo nodded. "Beethoven, The Tempest. Can you go play the opening notes on the piano?" Sophie asked. "Just the loud ones." The grand piano sat in the corner of the library. "Now?" Leo asked. "Yes, loud." Leo pulled away from her. He walked across the room. The capos stopped talking. They stared at the autistic boy, wondering what he was doing. Vincent frowned. "Dante, maybe the boy should go back to his room. This is business." "Let him be," Dante said softly, watching Sophie. He saw her face. He saw the terror in her eyes and the slight nod she gave toward Vincent. Leo sat at the piano. He raised his hands. Crash! He slammed down on the keys. A dissonant, dark, stormy chord. The sudden noise made everyone jump. Vincent's hand flew to his jacket pocket, the pocket where he kept his gun. It was a reflex, a guilty reflex. Dante saw it. He saw Vincent reach for the weapon before anyone else had even reacted. "Vincent," Dante said, his voice deceptively calm. "Why are you reaching for your piece?" Vincent froze. The noise. It startled me. "You're jumpy," Dante said. He stood up slowly, like a man who has something to hide. "I have nothing to hide, cousin," Vincent said, a sheen of sweat appearing on his upper lip. "Sophie," Dante said, not taking his eyes off Vincent. "What does the room smell like?" Sophie stepped forward. Her legs were shaking, but her voice was clear. "It smells like vanilla," she said, "and cloves, the same smell that was in Leo's room when the doll was left on his pillow." The room went silent. The other capos looked at Vincent. They smelled the smoke coming from his direction. "That's ridiculous," Vincent laughed, but it was a high, nervous sound. "I smoke cloves, so do 1,000,000 people." "And the shoe," Sophie added. "You have green spinach on your heel, Vincent, from the kitchen, from when you paid Paolo to poison the smoothie." Vincent's face crumbled. The mask of the charming cousin vanished, replaced by the snarl of a trapped rat. "He's weak," Vincent screamed, pulling his gun. "He cares more about that retard son of his than the business I did it for the family." He aimed the gun at Dante, but Dante was faster. He didn't even draw a weapon. He grabbed a heavy crystal whiskey decanter from the table and hurled it. It smashed into Vincent's face with a sickening crunch. Vincent's gun went off the bullet, shattering a window, but he fell backward, blood pouring from his nose. Before Vincent could hit the floor, Marco was on him. 2 other capos drew their guns and aimed them at Vincent's head. Dante walked around the table. He stood over his cousin, who was groaning on the Persian rug. "You call my son weak," Dante whispered. "He just exposed you with a piano chord. He is smarter than you will ever be." Dante looked at the other capos. "Take him to the warehouse. I will deal with him personally tonight." As they dragged the screaming Vincent away, Dante turned to Sophie. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her dizzy. She swayed. Dante caught her. He pulled her into his chest right against his uninjured side. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling deeply. "You did it," he whispered into her ear. "You saved us both." Sophie clung to him. She looked over Dante's shoulder and saw Leo still sitting at the piano watching them. Leo played one final note. A soft, high C. A note of resolution. But as Sophie looked at Dante, she knew the story wasn't over. The war was won, but the hardest part was just beginning. Now they had to figure out how to be a family. And there was one secret left. A secret Sophie had been keeping from Dante about her own past. A secret that was about to come knocking on the front door. 2 weeks had passed since the betrayal, and the Moretti estate had transformed. The heavy gloom was replaced by a fragile peace. Mornings were spent in the garden with Leo, who was now speaking in full sentences, and evenings were spent with Dante, who watched them with a look of wonder, as if he couldn't believe this domestic happiness was real. But Sophie knew she was living on borrowed time. The past always collects its debts. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. Dante summoned her to his study. The moment she entered, she felt the temperature drop. The fire was roaring, but Dante's eyes were cold, dead cold. Marco stood by the door, his hand hovering near his holster. "Sit down, Sophie," Dante said. His voice was devoid of the warmth that had grown there over the last 2 weeks. "Is it Leo?" she asked, her heart hammering. "Leo is fine. We are talking about you." Dante tossed a manila folder onto the mahogany desk. It slid across the surface and stopped right in front of her. "I told you I find out everything. It took the FBI contacts time to unseal the records, but they found it." Sophie opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside lay a copy of a birth certificate. It didn't say Sophie Vance. It read, Sofia Valenti. Valenti! Dante spat the name like a curse. The daughter of Carlo Valenti, the man who testified against my father 20 years ago, the biggest rat in the history of the New York mob. Dante slammed his hands on the desk, leaning over her, his shadow consuming her. "You are the daughter of the man who tried to destroy my family." "I am not my father," Sophie cried, standing up, tears streaming down her face. "I was 6 years old when we went into witness protection. I didn't choose that life. I ran away when I was 18, because I couldn't stand the lying. I changed my name back to Sophie because I wanted to be me, not a ghost." "Did you know who I was?" Dante demanded. "Yes, everyone knows who you are. But I didn't come for revenge. I was a waitress. I saw a little boy hurting and I helped him. That is all. In my world, blood tells," Dante roared. He pulled a sleek black Beretta from his drawer. The metal glinted in the firelight. "Maybe you're playing the long game, waiting to strike from the inside." I saved Leo from acid. Sophie shouted, her fear turning into righteous anger. I sewed your shoulder when you were bleeding to death. If I wanted you dead, Dante, you would be buried already. My father taught me that a man who trusts is a man who dies, Dante said, though the gun wavered slightly. Your father was wrong. Sophie stepped around the desk. She walked straight up to the barrel of the gun. She pressed her chest against it, right over her beating heart. Dante froze. His eyes widened. Pull the trigger, Sophie whispered. If you think I am my father, do it. If you think the last 2 weeks were a lie, do it. I have nowhere else to go. You and Leo, you are all I have. Dante stared at her. He looked into her green eyes and saw no deception, only a terrifying amount of love. He looked at her hands, the hands that had calmed his son, the hands that had saved his life. He realized that for 20 years he had lived by a rhythm of death. Sophie was offering him a rhythm of life. His hand shook. A single tear escaped his eye. Slowly, agonizingly, he clicked the safety on and dropped the gun on the desk. I can't, he choked out. I don't care who your father was. You are Sophie. You are mine. He pulled her into a crushing embrace, burying his face in her neck, shaking with the release of a lifetime of paranoia. Suddenly, the heavy door creaked open. Leo stood there clutching a drawing. He saw his father crying. He saw Sophie holding him. Usually, high emotion made Leo retreat, but not today. He walked into the room, wrapped his small arms around Dante's leg and Sophie's waist. Group hug, Leo announced, like in the movie. Dante laughed, a wet, broken, beautiful sound. He picked Leo up, keeping his other arm wrapped tight around Sophie. The war outside might continue, but in this room, the Moretti family was finally whole. That is the story of Sophie and the Moretti family. It's a story that reminds us that sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones with the guns or the money. The strongest people are the ones who see someone in pain and refuse to look away. Sophie didn't just save a boy. She saved a father from his own darkness. She proved that love is the only thing powerful enough to break the cycle of violence. What would you have done if you were in Sophie's shoes? Would you have risked your life for a stranger's child? And more importantly, do you think Dante was right to forgive her for her father's past? Let me know in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It helps us share more stories like this. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that love wins, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new drama. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.